You're listening to the American edition of The Voice of Russia. I'm Rick Young in Washington. In Russia, a huge celebration for Victory Day. What is that? Well, our guest is William C. Brumfield. He's a contemporary American historian and professor of Slavic studies at Tulane University. He's also a recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Fellowship. And, Professor, thanks for joining us.
Quite welcome.
First of all, for the American audience, we have our Memorial Day and Veterans Day, but we really don't have a day that is set aside to celebrate the end of World War II. Why is this so special for the Russian people?
Well, for the Russian people, the major victory occurred when the unconditional surrender was signed with Nazi Germany. In the case of the United States, there, of course, was great rejoicing when that final instrument of peace was signed, but the United States was still involved in a major war in the Pacific. So it's rather a different situation. For us, for the United States, the war continued. So what day are you going to celebrate? The United States, our country, decided to make one day commemorative for America's sacrifices in all the wars. But for Russia, because of the overwhelming significance and the overwhelming sacrifice of the war against the Nazi regime, for them it's a very different emotional factor. So that the day of the surrender, the triumph over Nazi Germany, is the day that they celebrate.
When you say tremendous sacrifices, how tremendous were those sacrifices?
Well, the latest estimates are somewhere around 26 million people who lost their lives in the Soviet Union. And battlefield casualties were a large part of that, but it should also be pointed out that innocent, unarmed civilians were slaughtered on very large parts of the territory of the Soviet Union, the western part of the Soviet Union. And this is something that to this day is one of the great stains on the history of our civilization, how something could have been so barbarous. So that the military valor enabled finally our civilization to come out of that nightmare, and that is something that can never be forgotten.
When we take a look at the enormity of the losses in the Russian defeat of the Nazi and German army in World War II, are there certain instances, such as the siege of Stalingrad, where so many people were affected by that? Can you tell us about that?
Well, the siege of Leningrad, of course,
Leningrad
was one of the greatest epics of the entire war. The city was cut off, blockaded in the fall of 1941. Food supplies were not properly protected, and starvation began rather quickly. Extreme measures were taken to reach the besieged population, the famous road across the ice, Lake Ladoga. So there were slim connections with the rest of the Soviet Union, unoccupied territory, but for many months, particularly in the first terrible year, 1941-42, the city was on starvation rations. And I think at the end of it all, almost 1 million people, around 900,000, died within the city itself, and I don't believe that includes the combat deaths around the city. So that is one of the most horrifying episodes of the Second World War, and one of the resistance of the city is one of the most heroic episodes. You mentioned Stalingrad. Also, the losses there were enormous, but primarily they were battlefield losses. I think if you look at the entire Stalingrad campaign, which lasted from late summer until the early part of 1943, then the Soviet casualties exceed the entire casualties of our country during the Second World War. But again, the numbers are simply vast.
In celebration of this Victory Day, this Day of Victory for the Russians, it's taken up, and I'm sure you have, some of the video some of the pictures of the enormity of the celebration. Does this pretty much go to the heart of Russian culture in that they had a huge hand in ending World War II? How much does this mean to the Russian people?
I think it has to be one of the most important, if not the most important, holiday in Russia today. And part of that, again, goes back to the question of sacrifice, because I have worked throughout Russia, from the far northwest to Vladivostok in the east, and every city and every town and every village has its war memorial. I've photographed many of them, and sometimes they're quite simple, simply a list of names. And you get an idea of how this sacrifice works its way into every community. If you have any memory at all, you're going to remember what happened those people from your own community. So that it's very difficult for the Russians to escape the fact that this dedication is something that has an immediate meaning, and that, of course, impacts the enduring power of this celebration. Well, not everybody sees it in the same way, of course. But I think most people do watch the parade on television, at least part of it. And it's because every locality in some way is connected with this day of victory.
How about the young people of Russia today? Are you aware of how aware they are of this, or because of the massive celebrations they're having, they do become aware of this important part of Russian history and appreciate it?
I think that has to be a part of the calculation in the resources that go into the celebration and the parade, because people need to be educated, and a younger generation doesn't have that direct or immediate connection. They could hear from their parents or their grandparents, but the parade is a very obvious way of reminding people of the victory. As I said, people relate to it in different ways, and not everyone is going to see the meaning with the same level of intensity. But certainly that's a connection that you mentioned. The educational mission of this celebration.
Well, we have the same problem, I'm sure the Russians do, in that obviously many World War II vets are dying off, and they're dying off, and obviously in large numbers because of age. Given the extent of the celebration, do you think that we'll be seeing this Victory Day parade probably 50 years from now?
I think so. And an important role in this, in our country, as well as in Russia, is the role of museums. And at this point, I should say that I'm talking to you from the campus of Tulane University in New Orleans. And New Orleans has the National World War II Museum in this country.
Very good.
They've recently opened a very large fourth building in their campus. Eventually, I think they plan to have 6 buildings. I don't know whether you've seen the museum, but it is a remarkable institution. The Russians also have a museum and a commemorative site. It's called Poklonnaya Gora in Moscow. A number of cities. Petersburg has its own site and museum. Moscow particularly has a very large complex dedicated to the war, and the museums will continue to have a part in keeping the memory alive and telling people about why this was so important, so necessary. But each generation will face this in its own way. I think the same thing is true of the memorials in Poland, Auschwitz, and so forth. It's the duty of each generation to preserve this narrative.
Do you have a website?
I have a website, and in fact, more than one. My main website is created in Russia, and it is CULT info, one word, .ru/Brumfield.
Okay. Well, we've been talking with William Brumfield, a contemporary American historian, a professor of Slavic studies at Tulane University in New Orleans, and you just heard the website address. William, thanks for joining us at the American edition of The Voice of Russia.
You're quite welcome.
Okay, have a good day.